A 68-year-old mother was thrown out of her own daughter's house in the middle of the rain, carrying only an old suitcase and a secret that could not be bought with all the money in the world. Emily thought she was getting rid of a burden, never imagining that by shutting that door she was actually sealing her own ruin. And I am not talking only about money. What Rose kept between the yellowed pages of an old journal had the power to change the destiny of the entire family forever. Stay until the end, because what happened later in court forces you to think about how far a child's ingratitude can go. Before we discover how this story ends, write in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Your presence means a lot to us. Rose was 68 years old, and her hands looked like a map of ancient roads. Every wrinkle spoke of sacrifices, of sleepless nights, and of an entire life given out of love. For decades she was almost invisible. She cleaned the most luxurious mansions in Chicago and cared for other people's children so that her only daughter, Emily, would never know what it was like to go hungry or cold. Life forced her to learn very early how to turn pain into silence and work into dignity. Emily, on the other hand, grew up staring at bright store windows, longing for a life of luxury, with a heart hardened by ambition. When she married Charles, a man with a practiced smile and a frozen soul, Rose's presence began to feel like an annoyance to them. 2 years earlier, Emily had convinced her mother to sell her little house in the countryside. "Come live with us, Mom. You cannot keep living alone," she said. Rose, believing that in the autumn of her life she would finally find warmth in her daughter's affection, agreed. She did not know that by handing over the keys to her old home she was also handing her freedom to people who would end up treating her like a prisoner. The cohabitation was dry, cold, without tenderness. In that house of grey walls and expensive furniture, Rose became invisible. Charles treated her as if she were an old object out of place, and Emily acted as if her mother were a bothersome debt she had to endure, complaining even about every plate served at the table. The only light in Rose's days was her grandson, Leo, who was 10 years old. He alone saw what his parents ignored. He saw his grandmother getting up at 5 in the morning to make breakfast. He saw the care with which she ironed Charles's shirts. He saw the tenderness with which she read him stories at night. "Grandma, why does Mom talk to you so badly?" he asked her one night. Rose smiled with a soft sadness and answered, "Sometimes people forget how to love, Leo. But you must never forget." Everything changed one night in July, the coldest the city had seen in years. Dinner was served. Rose, exhausted after a long day of work, tried to bring Emily's favorite stew to the table. Then fate, or perhaps the accumulated weariness of a lifetime, played against her. A spasm shot through her hand. A sharp pain made her lose her grip, and the blue porcelain plate, a family heirloom she had kept for 40 years, slipped from her fingers and shattered into 1,000 pieces on the granite floor. The sound of the porcelain breaking was the spark that set everything off. Charles jumped up as if it had been a personal attack, and Emily finally dropped her mask. "Enough!" she shouted, her face twisted with contempt. "You ruin everything. You take up space. You smell of damp and the past. I cannot stand to even look at you anymore, Mom." Rose, kneeling on the floor and picking up the pieces with trembling hands, did not answer. But her silence seemed to enrage her daughter even more. Charles, with his arms crossed, pronounced the sentence. "You had better leave, Rose. This environment is not for you anymore." "And where will I go at this hour?" Rose asked with a voice that was barely holding together. "I do not care," Emily replied coldly. "Pack your things and get out right now." Leo cried in a corner of the living room, but Charles held him by the arm and would not let him go to his grandmother. Rose stood up with a dignity that shone even in the middle of that humiliation. She went into her small room, took the old suitcase she had arrived with from the countryside, and inside it she placed a worn leather notebook and a folder of documents that no one in that house had ever seen. When she crossed the doorway, the freezing rain struck her face. Emily slammed the door hard behind her, and the sound of the deadbolt echoed in Rose's chest like a gunshot. She walked down the sidewalk with weak legs until she stopped at a park bench under the yellow light of a street lamp. There, between the cold and the loneliness, she did not cry. She only opened the suitcase and stroked the old journal, because hidden there was the secret she had kept for decades. And that secret was that Rose had not only been a cleaner. While her daughter studied in private schools paid for by her mother's sweat, Rose wrote in silence under the pseudonym Rose de Vero. She had become one of the most widely read authors of historical novels in the country. Her books, dedicated to strong, surviving women, had been authentic bestsellers. The royalties had accumulated in a secret account that she had set aside to build a future for Emily, a future her daughter clearly did not deserve. But it was not only about money. Rose also kept proof, documents, and property rights that could change everything. The next morning, while Emily and Charles drank coffee in silence, feeling for the first time the strange weight of an empty house, someone knocked on the door. It was not Rose begging to come back. It was a court officer accompanied by impeccably dressed lawyers. Mrs. Emily Allen. The official asked. Yes, that is me. What do you want? We are here to deliver an official notice of eviction and restitution of property. Emily let out a nervous laugh. That must be a mistake. This house is mine. My husband and I bought it with the money from the sale of my mother's house and with a loan. One of the lawyers intervened calmly. Actually, the credit you took out was acquired 6 months ago by an investment holding company that belongs to Mrs. Rose Allen. In addition, the sale of the former home has been declared invalid due to signature forgery. Mrs. Rose remains the rightful owner of that property, and also of the land linked to this residence. Emily's world fell apart. Charles turned pale. For the first time, that practiced arrogance vanished from his face. But the punishment was only beginning. Rose did not return to live there. She appeared a few minutes later, stepping out of a black car, dressed in a sober elegance that Emily had never seen on her. She looked at her daughter not with hatred, but with a compassion so deep that it hurt more than a slap. I was planning to leave all of this to you, Emily, Rose said, and her firm, serene voice filled the foyer. I wrote every one of those pages thinking of leaving you a legacy. But last night, when you threw me into the street in the rain, you showed me that you deserve neither my past nor my present. Mom, I was nervous, Emily tried to say, stepping closer with tears that smelled more of fear than of regret. Do not interrupt me, Rose stopped her. The real secret was never the money. The secret was to see if the upbringing I gave you had reached your heart, and you failed that test. Then she delivered the final blow, one that no one expected. She did not throw Emily and Charles into the street without more. She did something much harder for their pride, and much more transformative. I have turned this house into a foundation for elderly women abandoned by their own families. Here they will find shelter, food, and dignity. You have 24 hours to leave. But since I am still your mother, I have paid for you for 3 months in a simple boarding house, very similar to the one I lived in when you were born. Emily screamed, begged, cried, but Rose was already hugging Leo, who had run down the stairs. And Leo? Charles asked, trying to use the boy as a shield. Leo is coming with me, Rose replied. There is already a shared custody order authorized by the court. Besides, he has clearly expressed his desire to live with his grandmother in the new house I bought for us. He is the only one in this family who understands that true wealth is not in what one owns, but in what one is. Months later, Rose's house had become a refuge of light. Rose kept writing, but now her story spoke of forgiveness that does not accept humiliation, and of dignity that cannot be negotiated. Emily and Charles, forced to live a simple life and to work ordinary jobs, watched from afar the success of the woman they once called a burden. Emily tried many times to win her mother back, but Rose's answer was always the same, delivered through Leo. I forgive you, daughter, but sharing my life with me was a privilege, and you threw it to the floor along with the pieces of that blue porcelain. At the end of her days, Rose was remembered not only for her fortune or her books, but for the silent lesson she left written on the walls of that foundation. Whoever does not honor the hand that fed them will end up starving to death in the middle of a golden banquet. This story reminds us that life always gives back what we give. Everything returns, sooner or later, like an echo. If you also believe that honoring your father and mother is the foundation of everything, leave your like and write a word of gratitude in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe to Stories of Life so you do not miss any of our most moving tales. Until next time.